trying to remember when I discovered the Muffins, but I'm thinking that it was probably when I was still in high school, because I remember listening to them in my dorm as a freshman in college. I was always interested in avant-garde music and anything that was influenced by Frank Zappa. And here was a band I think that probably showed up on Prog Archives, or maybe I connected them to the Cuneiform record label, which I was just beginning to discover. I actually got Manna Mirage for Christmas, and in that same gift haul, I also got Soft Machine Alive 1970, which is the same performance that I ended up working on. So I got both this Manna Mirage and Soft Machine at the same time. Yeah, it's hard to remember. It seems like the Muffins have always kind of been there. And, I've been friends with Dave Newhouse for a few years now, and I've worked with him on several projects. And then also Paul Sears, I know him personally, and I've hung out with him. So to me, I'm coming to this band with a personal connection as much as a musical interest. And I think that's probably important when talking about my discovery and how I got to know this band.
Today's request comes from Ian Beabout, a fellow YouTube creator who runs the Shed Sounds channel. Ian is also a studio musician. His duo Coloratura, with a U, drops their new album WTF Was That on October 27th. Nice! Congrats, Ian! Meanwhile, check out their previous albums at coloratura.bandcamp.com. Ian requested Manna Mirage by the Muffins, released in 1978 on Random Radar Records, which became Cuneiform Records in 1984. Cuneiform is one of the bastions of deeper cut jazz and prog. Their releases include works by Art Bears, Soft Machine, Wadada Leo Smith, and even the Microscopic Septet, the ensemble responsible for the minute-long tune called Evil Twin, also known as the greatest intro music in the history of NPR. The news is next. When I first got my copy of the Manna/Mirage LP, the first thing that stood out to me was the band included Tom Scott on piccolo, flute, sax, clarinet, oboe, recorder, and percussives. And I immediately thought, whoa, you mean like the Tom Scott from LA Express? Like the Tom Scott that played with the Blues Brothers and Ricky Lee Jones and Steely Dan? The sax player on both Boz Scaggs' Silk Degrees and Joni's Court and Spark? That Tom Scott? Turns out, no, not that Tom Scott. Oh man, can you imagine being another sax player named Tom Scott? I bet he's sick to death of having that conversation. Starting out the week, the only other information I have is what I learned from Ian's original email. Apparently, the Muffins consider themselves to be a band in the Canterbury style, heavily influenced by Robert Wyatt and Hatfield in the North, only from America. Well, if I'm not mistaken, there's a Canterbury in Connecticut. Yeah, but the Muffins are from D.C. But then again, most of Gong were from France, so maybe geography doesn't matter so much when it comes to who counts as Canterbury. Fair enough. Well, shall we? Yes, let's.
I think what is important to know about the Muffins going in is that they were an American band who were heavily influenced by British bands like the Soft Machine and Henry Cow at a time before the internet. The fusion of the weird avant-garde prog rock Canterbury influence of like Henry Cow and Soft Machine with somebody like Sun Ra. So I think that's what made them unique. They were influenced by things that just weren't common for American bands to hear, and I think that just makes them stand out. I think you should also know that over the years they developed a relationship with Fred Frith from Henry Cow, and he produced I guess you could say their second or third album, depending on if you count Air Fiction, 185. Again, this is that thing about influences coming together that you wouldn't necessarily think belonged. I do think that when listening to this record, what you should understand is that this is essentially a home recording, I think. I think they did this pretty much in the Muffins house. And the Muffins lived communally. Like they all lived in one house and they rehearsed. They had an incredibly intense rehearsal schedule. It was like a Frank Zappa level rehearsal, 8-hour days, 5 days a week. And then they'd go out and perform. But I know that several members of the band have expressed that they feel like the performance on the Manna Mirage album isn't the best. And I think that the relevant disc on the box set, which is disc 5, has a recording by Tom Scott's sister Colleen, and it is excellent, in my opinion, an excellent performance and an excellent fidelity. And I think that if you really want to hear what these guys were capable of, I think you should probably seek out this box set, either digitally or preferably physically.
The thing that's impressing me most on the first couple of spins of Manna/Mirage is the fact that it has the timbral complexity of an 11-piece ensemble, but in the credits they're telling me that there are just 4 people in the band and like a small brass section on a couple of songs as guest artists. They seem to be able to effortlessly switch from wind ensemble to percussion ensemble to Rhodes and sax quartet with endless combinations and permutations. And while there are a couple of filter and reverb effects applied in key moments, mostly the tunes on Manna/Mirage sound as if they could actually be performed not only live, but also acoustically. Well, except the electric piano. Monkey with the Golden Eyes starts off simply enough with a pretty standard set of changes on the Rhodes and a simple melody. But less than 30 seconds later, and we're already starting to hear some echoes of some of the more interesting Mothers of Invention's instrumental pieces from like Lumpy Gravy or Uncle Meat, only with electric piano accompaniment. It's at about 1:45 where we get the repeated odd meter phrase played on the mallets, where things get interesting for me. The electric piano accompaniment and the wind phrases continue, but we also get a very Robert Wyatt sounding transistor organ that slowly swells up, along with some subdued low brass. Fascinating arrangement. In Hobart Got Burned, things feel a lot more improvised, almost to the levels of free jazz, but not like Ornette Coleman free jazz, more like Gold Sparkle Band. There does seem to be some composed moments early on, but mostly Hobart Got Burned feels like free improv. Until about the 3:15 mark when we get a standard Rhodes trio accompaniment for the sax, turning the previously free lines into more of a traditional solo. But then they transition to a B section in alternating bars of 6/8 and 11/16, basically dropping a 16th note every other bar. And the bass in Hobart Got Burned is a heavy pick down near the bridge kind of a thing, which is an interesting contrast against the traditional free jazz sounds from the drums, Rhodes, and sax. Maybe like if Chris Squire played with Pharoah Sanders. AMELIA EARHART, the last song on side 1. This features individual performers one at a time with abrupt transitions in tempo, meter, style from one section to the next. So while there are some clever and even some funny moments, they all blow by very quickly, and you really can't put any kind of a descriptor on the song as a whole. Mostly it lives in more up-tempo space with high-energy improvisations and tricky composed lines. But some of the best moments happen when they suddenly bring things way down, or suddenly decide to switch to swing time, or suddenly decide to just run practice exercises. And don't forget the train whistles! And finally, The Adventures of Captain Boomerang, parentheses, for Mike Forrester, close parentheses. A sprawling 24-minute epic of a composition. And composition is the right word to use. This is what I call deterministic music. Rigidly composed, codified sets of notes to be executed in the right order. In other words, no improvisation. Right, or not much anyway. There's a bit with some processed sax noises and a small solo about 18 minutes in, but other than that, this piece is interpreted and executed like classical music, only using rock and jazz instruments. But despite the fact that it has several changes in feel and abrupt dynamic changes throughout it, it still feels like one piece and not several leftover ideas all glued together. If anything, the adventures of Captain Boomerang (for Mike Forrester) feels like the necessary culmination of the 3 songs on side 1. Overall, this is a charming album, impressive and engaging. It's also very cerebral. Manna Mirage isn't sucker punch to the lower chakra music. It's more like chamber music for those who have graduated from Weasel's Rip My Flesh. There's a lot to like, but it definitely requires your attention.
What does this album mean to me? It's a case of a group of really dedicated musicians and friends who believed in a style of music that was unconventional. It was not something that was going to be played on the radio. It was not going to be an easy road for these guys by any means. And this is guys who just did it. Like they probably had people tell them they shouldn't do it, and they did it. And it's wonderful, beautiful music that's here to enjoy. And not only that, but they left a legacy. Like there's 40 years of recordings that I've sifted through and that I've heard. This album is special to me because it represents the beginnings of one of the acts who influenced me the most. Like I am so influenced by what Dave Newhouse and Tom Scott, Billy Swan, and Paul Sears were able to accomplish with these recordings, and also Steve Feigenbaum. And my continued work with him is something that I really cherish. So yeah, this album means all of those things.
As I was researching the Muffins, I saw in their discography that they had one film credit called Romantic Warriors. Romantic Warriors is a 4-part documentary series made by Adele Schmidt and Jose Zagara Holder from 2010 to 2021. I watched part 3, Canterbury Tales. And included a lot of interviews from the artists of the Canterbury scene. David Allen, Mont Campbell, Richard and David Sinclair, Pye and Jimmy Hastings, Jeff Richardson, Phil Miller, a ton. But one of the things they did was to include interviews with folks not from the UK, but were inspired by Canterbury bands, like Super Sister from the Netherlands, Moving Gelatin Plates from France, and the Muffins from DC. Plus some of the newer bands that are carrying on in the tradition, like the amazingly named Sid Arthur. Man, I wish I'd thought of that one. And I'm really glad that I watched it. It helped me to understand how the scene came about in the first place. See, the image that I'd formed in my head after last season was of this gigantic community full of amazingly talented people, all happily collaborating with each other in endless combinations, and, well, that image was incomplete at best. Because, yes, we have the amazingly talented people. Yes, we have the large community of friends. But mostly what happened was dozens of voices all looking for their own path forward, but not always feeling like they could adequately express themselves in their current project. So they'd bail and start a new project with their friends. Combine that with the fact that they largely had to leave the UK to actually make any money, and what you see behind all the charming, subtle, clever music is a sincere and ongoing struggle for artistic growth, and also for recognition. And from what I saw in the documentary, the Muffins fit that aspect of the scene, that push for their own creative voice and for their own audience. And that makes them a Canterbury band just as much as their music. I like Manna/Mirage quite a bit, but I also recognize that this album will have a niche spot in my music rotation. This is not background music for working on chores, and it's not necessarily driving music either. No, Manna/Mirage goes in the same category as like the Peter Iotvos conducted recording of The Rite of Spring from 2006, or Agartha and Pangaea by Miles Davis. Music that only comes out when I have the time to sit with headphones and take it all in. So, final word, scale of 1 to 10. I give Manna/Mirage a fresh chocolate chip from the mill. If you know, you know. See you next week.